Hey folks, today you probably have seen that Canon has just announced the R6 Mark II. It comes 2 years and a bit after the R6 original was announced. Unfortunately, and I don't want to start this off on a sour note, I still have no access to Canon in Hong Kong or America or Australia for that matter. If anyone from Canon is watching, I would really love to get hands-on with your gear to be able to give more considered and, hands-on thoughts on stuff when it's announced. Please, somebody reach out or even just return my emails. I would really appreciate it. Looking at my handwritten notes of what seems to stand out on this guy, there are some obvious improvements and some things that I think you want to keep in mind that maybe don't come through on the spec sheet, kind of reality checks about it. There's some things that look really good and honestly some disappointments. At $2,500 US, which is what the R6 was selling for, it's currently been dropped down to $100, so it's 23 and this is 25, I guess just until stock clears. It's got stiff competition. It's up against, the Sony A7 IV, among other things, which has so much of Sony's top technology in there. I actually just got a message from a friend Daniel on Instagram today asking he wants to go traveling and he's got a 5D Mark III. Should he consider the R or the RP for a lighter kit? And I had to say to him, if he'd asked me this a year or even a year and a half ago, I would have said probably don't get either one. They felt like stopgap cameras that were released in a rush and that there's got to be something better coming. But now, another year down the track, I still can't really recommend one. The R6 II is a nice improvement, but there's a couple of things in there that I just don't really get, like keeping the same processor that the R6 had, which is also one that dates back to DSLR days. That's an old processor for a camera that they're trying to squeeze more and more out of. Anyway, let's jump into the specs. Before that, this isn't a sponsored segment. I just wanted to make sure that you saw my last video before this one. I introduced this new travel tripod from R6ii. It's really cool. I hope all of the things that I tried to explain in that video came through. It's essentially packs down really nice and tight, and it's got something extra special, which is the center column has 3 points of contact instead of just the one skinny center column that a normal travel tripod has, which is the real weak point. Travel tripods usually don't go high enough for you to stand straight up, so then having something, the width of your pinky be the center column is going to introduce wobble. This having 3 points makes it much more stable, and it actually detaches and becomes a second tripod, which can get pretty much all the way down to the ground, among lots of other cool features on this one. It's currently up on Kickstarter. You can check the link of that below. I'll also link the video above. Now, let's talk about this camera. So it's already up on pre-order. First things to note, it's a 24.2 megapixel sensor. Apparently it's brand new. And for the end of 2022, maybe delivery close to 2023, it's not backside illuminated, which is kind of a bummer. They are, however, and I think this is pretty incredible, proud to announce that it has 40 frames per second electronic shutter in stills. That's great, and that means that the readout speed must be pretty dang fast to be able to get that 40 frames a second. I guess it's going to mean you need to be shooting in really bright light and, at a 2,000th of a second or something to be able to achieve that frames per second. Two things to note about that, and this is the reality checks that I wanted to mention. First, you can only do that in 12-bit RAW. You can't do it in the highest quality RAW. No shade, 40 frames per second is still incredible. And this is only using SD cards still. So whereas something like the A7 IV has the option for a CF Express A, it's much faster than SD, which means if you do shoot 40 frames a second RAW, you're going to have a long time for it to be able to actually clear that from the, to the cards. This is going to let you do 4K 60p oversampled from the 6K output, which is great. Full width recording, not cropped, for one of the first times in this kind of point in the market for Canon. That's great, and it'll let you do 6K RAW, of course, externally though. What I've seen, the people who have gotten hands-on with this, there isn't the external support yet, so can't actually test how that quality is looking. I have to say, it's always a little frustrating when I used to get invited to press events, and then they would give you a pre-production camera and say, you can't talk about this, share that. My feeling is if you send something to be reviewed, you're sending it as is to be reviewed. If you don't want it reviewed until it's a final production unit, then don't send it out to that point. Anyway, as I mentioned, this has the same Digic X processor that was in the earlier cameras, dating back to, I think it was the 1DX Mark III. Another cool thing, the 30-minute recording limit has been removed. But again, the reality check is that apparently they've improved the circuitry, so the overheating that we were seeing isn't so much of an issue. But at 4K 60p internal, without the 30-minute recording limit, it's still really only capable of up to about 40 minutes. So depending on what you're shooting, that's going to be plenty. For some things we shoot, having the ability to go, beyond that to an hour or further is really handy. Now, the R6ii, interesting, is claiming the world's most effective image stabilization at 8 stops of coordinated control image stabilization. That, however, is kind of misleading, or maybe they made that claim before Sony's a7R5 came out, or things like the Hasselblad HX2D100C. Because this is actually saying 7 stops in body and it's 8 stops once you're combining it with the lens, whereas the Sony is claiming 8 stops in body. So we'll have to wait and see how that actually performs. The numbers I've seen, and this is totally, I'm just an armchair reading off a piece of paper at the moment, but what I've seen from other reviewers testing it, it seems like the the stabilization they were getting was not as dramatic as I was getting from the Hasselblad, but this is claiming a stop of further compensation, so we'll have to actually get that in and test it out for ourselves. Two cool things, they are bringing in pre-release on this one, so you're going to have, for stills, only, unfortunately, half a second before you start shooting, so you're all lined up, you're focused. When you hit the button, you can enable it so that the half a second before you hit the button was all recorded as well. But for video, it's going to give you the option of 3 to 5 seconds of pre-record. So you're waiting for the action, you see something, you quickly stumble up and hit the record button. It will have actually captured that 3 or 5 seconds depending on what you set. Just note, if you aren't on, awkward segue, on a quality tripod, if you're just hand holding, when you go up to hit the record, you're often shaking the camera, and then that 3 seconds before you hit the button is not really usable. So you're probably going to want to be locked down so that when you hit the button, it's actually all focused, stable, level, and good to go. A couple of other things. It is using the same Dual Pixel 2 AF, which is, I've tested it and it's pretty fantastic. However, looking at some of the samples, I saw some from the DP review channel where it was missing obvious faces and grabbing like diving blocks and that kind of thing in the scene for a system that has been out and was one of the very first mirrorless systems. Well, not one of the very first, Sony was so far ahead, but Canon has been in this game for a long time. Their autofocus is great. That's kind of surprising to see that it would miss when there were obvious faces in the scene like that. The screens are also pretty uninspiring. We're talking 3.69 for the EVF and 1.62 for the rear 3-inch screen. That's kind of 2020 level, but this is their jack of all trades camera, but still at $2,500 US, it's not a bargain. And when you translate that to Australia or somewhere, you're probably looking at like $4,000 for the camera. I think if you just take it as it is, it's a pretty nicely rounded out overall camera. If you're doing hybrid work, stills and video, I think you'll get a lot of great work out of it. I don't know that it's a really significant improvement over the R6. It would have been great to see the stacked backside illuminated sensor come into this one, or better screens, or a new card format in there rather than relying on the SD. So not a bad camera, a good overall, but having the old processor, the old cards, and the old screens, it does still feel a bit old, for want of a less redundant term. Let me know your thoughts on this one. If you are in the market for this kind of price at $2,500, kind of mid-entry level for a full-frame mirrorless camera. What would be your go-to if you're in the Canon ecosystem? Please let me know if I missed any important features on this one that are really exciting for you as a Canon shooter. Leave your thoughts and feedback below. Make sure you check out the new HP tripod. The Kickstarter is up for like another 10 days or something from when I'm publishing this. It's $100 off for the Kickstarter, so don't miss out. Cheers guys, and I'll see you soon.